And welcome back to 42 to Doomsday. My name is Mark, and in this episode we're talking Daleks, but not the ones you're expecting. Telus Publishing are releasing Evolution of the Toy Dalek, Collecting Through the Ages, and we're delighted to be joined by the author of this magnificent tome, Alex Storer, as well as contributor and fellow Victorian, Doctor Who fan Mark Dunne. Welcome to the podcast, chaps. How are we?
Hi there. Pleasure to be here.
G'day, Mark. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. It's always nice to talk to a fellow Australian occasionally, and especially a Victorian. Alex, how are you going today?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Very excited to be on here and to be talking about the thing which has taken up the best part of my last year.
Before we delve into the book, tell us about your personal history with the program. How did you start watching it and transition from that viewer to fan stage?
That's something that I was thinking about when I wrote the introduction. It's a difficult question to answer because I don't have a clear point in time when I think, yes, that was when I first started watching the show. I think because my parents would always have it on, I probably just kind of grew up with it, and as I got older, became more aware of what I was watching. And I have some very vague recollections of watching it on a black and white TV, possibly Tom Baker stories. But my earliest clear memory of watching whole episodes and really understanding it is the early Peter Davison era. Things like Ark of Infinity and Mordred Undead. They were the first stories that really caught my attention and, got me hooked on the show. When the Five Doctors came on, I remember watching that when it was broadcast, and I already knew the Daleks, but I don't know how or why. I think it must have been one of the, they did the seasons of repeats, like Genesis and Destiny and what have you, in the early 80s, which I must have seen, but I don't remember watching. By the time Resurrection came along in 1984, I was besotted with Daleks from there on. That was the sort of trigger for my obsession with them, and I've loved them as much, if not more than, the show ever since.
And Mark, what about you?
Because obviously in Australia we had a lot of those repeats end on end with Pertwee Baker.
Especially season 12.
Yeah, and I was trying to recall because I think I've been a fan since I was probably about 7. So, and I do have recollections of watching. Mum and Dad used to have an old black and white Astor television that got retired into our spare room / rumpus room when they got their colour TV, and that's where I used to sit and play. And occasionally I just have these visions of Pertwee and Baker, just mixed memories. And then until I got a little bit older, I remember when ABC co-funded with the BBC for the Five Doctors. I remember Mum and Dad used to love watching a country practice show over here, and I had this memory of when the ad break went on, flicking across to the ABC and watching the Raston Warrior robots take out the Cybermen. So, but I've just got mixed memories as a younger kid, and then obviously as you get into teenage years, doing the video trading at a mate who had a beta recorder who was recording a lot of the Davo episodes and some of the Bakers, and he'd bring them into school and we'd transfer them across to VHS and take them home and watch them. But yeah, just a stable diet as I was getting older and older, just watching all those repeats in between the Goodies and Banana Man and all those other, and Danger Mouse and all those other shows that were on at the time. And I had a friend that immigrated from the UK when I was in grade 6, and he was probably one of the only other kids in the school that was a Doctor Who fan. So I found someone else that could talk nerd, essentially, because obviously way back then in the 80s, people looked at you a bit funny if you watched Doctor Who, mate.
Absolutely, had your head flushed down the toilet.
Yeah,
literally, and you get called out, and it was and that's why even now to this day I really don't sort of advertise that I'm a fan because of that whole social stigma thing. But it's quite
a solitary existence, I guess, especially back then in the 80s. So I made 2 friends at school when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. The first was a kid that was in my class who turned up with a toy Dalek, and we instantly got talking and became friends for life. There was an older kid, a couple of years older, and I don't think we initially sort of got on very well, but then when we heard each other was fans, then that was it. We just clicked, and he had 2 video recorders, so he was able to copy episodes that I hadn't got, or he would come into possession of a few seconds of Patrick Troughton running down a corridor in a shaky black and white clip. We would trade things, and he would do me copies of episodes or clips and bits and pieces. So, but I do remember that once we became friends, the first thing he did for me was he gave me a recording of the Five Doctors, so I was able to watch that again for the first time since it was broadcast. This is in 1980. 6, maybe, something like that. So it was very exciting at the time.
The Five Doctors is a great touching on story, isn't it? Like the 20th anniversary was very exciting at the time. A lot of people of our vintage have so much fond memories of that story, and it's interesting to see if today the Doctor in, say, 20 or 30 or 40 years will have that sort of same resonance.
I've already forgot what happened in it.
There you go.
It's one of the comfort watches, I think. It's one you can always put on and just...
Yeah.
It is comfort viewing. But it's also a bit like a best of.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you never get bored.
They're on for a winner, too, because how many times has the Five Doctors been released in some way, shape or form? I've lost count of how many copies I might have sitting on my shelf.
The ABC thanks you. The residuals are fantastic. Look, and as you said before, the Five Doctors had that particular pesky pepper pot. So in terms of Daleks, Alex, what is it that intrigues you about them? Is it the design or the philosophy around the Victorian sort of echoing some of that Second World War parallels? What is it about them?
Again, that's something that I've pondered over in the book, because it's why have I got an obsession for machines that are full of hate and do nothing but kill? I grew up with a lot of science fiction at home. I remember going to the cinema to see Star Wars and Tron, and we always had books of sci-fi art, and I remember as a young boy I was obsessed with robots. So I think as a mechanical design, the Daleks were just the most fascinating thing to see. You look at old science fiction films back in the 40s or 50s, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, for example. The robot Gort in that is quite terrifying, but it's just a man in a suit. It's a man-shaped robot.
Yeah.
Whereas the creatures in the War of the Worlds, the early version anyway, when the flying ones, they were much more petrifying. And like Robbie the Robot, again, it was man-shaped. I think the Daleks, especially at the time, you can imagine nobody would have really ever seen anything like that before. They were not humanoid-shaped. They didn't sound like people in suits, and they sort of moved silently around. And I think what captivated me as a young kid was their design more than anything, and what the hell was inside them, what was powering these things, and the voice, the look, the way they were lit in the show. There was just lots of things that just absolutely, for some inexplicable reason, really just captured my imagination, and I just became fascinated with the things, started drawing them. And
you're absolutely right, because you think about Cybermen, it's a person in a suit, where the Daleks design it's still brilliant to this day. And at the time in the 60s, my dad remembers seeing them for the first time on TV and going to the cinema to see, the Dalek movies. It's just the shape and the voices, and it's brilliant design, isn't it? I mean, poor old Raymond Cusack, apart from the £100 gratia payment, he still didn't get enough kudos for it, really. Unfortunately, so Terry Nation got the kudos for him.
The design that I think made it a success. When you look at the various initial concepts for the Daleks, the one that really did look like a salt shaker, I think they just got it right. They created something that had never been seen before, and that really has never been seen since. I mean, there's always been the jokes about the sink plunger and everything, but it's just a configuration of design elements that really, really works as a true alien being,
Like obviously when the Daleks came out in the 60s, the whole Dalekmania thing took off. So talk to us about the book and just give us an overview of what the actual book is and why you did it.
Well, the book is a history of toy and model Daleks from 1963 right up to present day. And it's the first of its kind, really, because, we've had loads of books or special magazines on the whole spectrum of Doctor Who merchandise, but nobody has ever done one purely devoted to the Daleks, and yet they are the most famous enemy in the show, and obviously the best-selling merchandise. The actual book came about in 2023 because I was quite unwell with a bad back, a slip disc, so I was out of action for several months. I couldn't do any of my normal activities. So I was just sort of sat around, and I thought, I can write kind of a book project could I come up with, and that's when I started thinking, well, I've always wanted to do something about the Daleks. I've always wanted to, because I've had other Doctor Who books on, like the Blackpool exhibitions, and another book that I did myself of my own memories of growing up with the show and that sort of thing. So I thought maybe continuing the approach I took with those, I could come up with something about the Daleks. And as I gradually got better, worked more and more on this project, and that was when Mark got involved. And I think what is now essentially an early sort of demo version, if you like, I originally released as a free digital download I think in the summer of 2023. I just thought I'd put it out there for other fans to download. looking back, yeah, it's not. It did its job. It could have been better written and better researched, but as a personal project for that particular time of life when I was really not in a good place, it served its purpose and it brought several people together, and it was good fun to produce. But it was only when Mark was in the UK and we visited David Howe to have a look at his private merchandise museum that we got talking, and the idea came up of perhaps Telos publishing a version. So that was when I decided, okay, we can go back to the drawing board and do a much bigger, better, more thoroughly researched and well thought out version. So I think that was probably January last year when I started doing that.
Obviously, with Dalekmania in the 60s and all the merchandisers getting on board, exploiting that particular character, how hard was it to get that documentation from those days in terms of researching it and obtaining it? I mean, those companies no longer exist. So how hard was it to get all that documentation from actually all the licensees, really, about them applying for the rights to do something with the Daleks?
Yeah, well, the book goes through every decade and looks at it. It doesn't look at some of the general merchandising, but it's really focused on the models and figures and toys by decade. So a lot of what I originally wrote about was just through my own years of amassing knowledge through being a fan and a collector. But when I started writing the new version of the book, I think it was more about talking to other collectors like Christopher Hill and obviously David, who has an encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who toys, combined with a lot of online research and that sort of thing. But I think as the project went along, it became easier to track people down to speak with, especially in the more later years. But, for example, I got to speak with a chap called Bob Brechin, who was the head toy designer at Palitoy in the 1970s. Yes. So he was the guy behind Action Man, Action Force, Star Wars, and, of course, the Doctor Who range. So being able to speak with somebody like that, just to even answer a few simple questions on that sort of thing, was really, really interesting. So while we didn't really track that many people down from the 60s or 70s, I think it was more, to get what information that I had got that I already knew from various sources, getting that verified, and any other little sort of facts and this, that, and the other. But quite proud of the list of interviewees that we've got in the end, because it was more than I ever dreamed of. Even found myself phoning up director Graham Harper at some point for a chat about a model sequence, which to my mind was just insane, and he was the nicest man and really supportive of the project, and as was everybody that I spoke to for it and got involved.
So while you were doing all the writing and sort of fleshing it out and putting it together, Mark, what were you doing in terms of helping out and assisting with the book? Because I know you've got a pretty good Dalek / character options / figures collection, and also how did you two sort of meet?
Yeah, it's really funny. I've sort of gone back and tried to timeline it, and it all stemmed from a project that's still to be released. And I posted some images on a Dapol website on Facebook from my visit to that Welsh exhibition in 2003 before it closed. And I just sort of had them, just basically a walkthrough. I was very lucky. The day I particularly went was during a weekday. It was getting towards the time when the exhibition was closing down. The shop was pretty much bare, but the exhibition itself was still there. So I had the place to myself. So I actually walked around and videoed the whole thing, and then took a lot of still frames and uploaded those to the group because they said they'd be interested in looking. And that's when I guess Alex was in the midst of dealing with that project with John Collier, and he said, would you be interested in contributing? And then we just started messaging, and then I sort of started contributing to that. And then once we'd finished with that project, which started off as just, would I like to write something, to doing a plethora of images for that project, I think Alex and I just started chatting and sort of said, well, this was great. What's next? And then Alex says, well, I've got this project I'm thinking of, doing. Would you be interested in helping out? So, and that's how the original fan ebook project commenced. And I just basically, it started off with, I guess, do you have these Daleks or whatever? And then it went from, I've got some of these, and I took some photos. And then obviously occasionally I do some figure photography and upload those to my YouTube channel. But essentially I could do some thematic type stuff with the figures that I had, and I'd find some, like I don't have a lot of the 60s stuff, but I've got some representation from that and beyond, but a lot of the character and 80s type stuff. So I was able to sort of contribute some of those sort of images. And then it was just really a constant, almost daily conversations. We would be on Messenger. And I think the friendship sort of really grew from that, because I have recollections we'd be messaging multiple times a day, just going through, discussing the book, getting opinions. Alex would just say, what do you think of this? And we just bounce off each other. I'm basically, as Mark, I think we discussed, Unit's unpaid scientific advisor.
Yeah.
Just not with the frills. Yeah, so essentially that's really how it all stemmed out, just a plethora of images from my own collection, some opinions, some conversations. So Alex had another head to bounce off, so to speak. And and that's sort of really how it went. And I did a contributing article for the original with 5 others, I think. Alex, is that right? Was there 6 contributors in total, I think, from memory?
5 or 6, yeah. I think something like that.
So then when that all went out live, we had a very small, just a contributor run printed out just for us, just for for recording purposes, to have something there on the coffee table for me to look back on to say, yep, this looks pretty good. And that's when my UK trip was sort of planned. We'd finished that project, and said by that stage we got, talking every day. And I said, well, I've got a trip planned. Do you want to meet up face to face? And I'd sort of planned a UK tour over about 3.5 weeks of catching up with some of these people I've been, speaking to, either by this sort of means or on Facebook. We did a little trip to Neil Cole's museum up in the Northumberlands. Yeah, did a little bit of a road trip, and that sort of cemented our friendship a bit more. And we've been going like that ever since. And so pretty much anything Alex is doing, I've always got an ear in on what he's doing now. And we sort of like to collaborate on little bits and pieces in what shape or form I can. So yeah, it's been fun. But yeah, lots of Dalek images from me.
Yeah, we've established good sort of team working. And one of the things that I wanted to, because I've also designed the book as well as written it, and what I wanted to do was I didn't want to fill it with photographs that we've already seen of existing pack shots. Yeah. I wanted it to be all pretty much new photography or purpose taken. So I was taking photographs, but obviously, Mark's got a lot more stuff than I have. So it would be, have you got this? Yeah, can you photograph me this? So I'd send over ideas, and other fans also on board doing similar thing from their collection, because that's the great thing. Every fan's collection is different. So what I hadn't got or what Mark hadn't got, somebody else would have. So it's all been sort of brought together. But I think, the photographs that you were taking, Mark, they got better and better the more we did. And the better the photographs, the better the design looked. So we'd be changing things around. It was a really constantly evolving project. And I think in the end, we've got over 600 photographs in the book, the majority of which were all purpose taken for it. There's only a very small number of photographs that you might have seen elsewhere before.
And especially you're designing the book, but you're also writing it. Sometimes it's hard to sort of separate the two. If you're doing it together and you're thinking this is how it should work, you sort of need a couple of pair of eyes to sort of do that separation. It's like one man's talking to himself in the forest, think it's all wonderful, but
Absolutely, yeah. I work on a lot of one-man projects like that, but when you're writing something and designing it, when you're putting your text in and doing the layout, you're not proofreading it, and even when you try and proofread it, you end up checking the design, so you really need other pairs of eyes. And a good friend of mine, Richard Hayes, wrote several pieces for the book, including the foreword. Richard was lucky enough to have experienced Dalekmania at the time, so he was very well placed to be writing about that sort of thing. But he's been an invaluable extra pair of eyes on it, as has David and his partner Steve, who will tell us. They provide feedback, so it's really been a big whole sort of melting pot of design, feedback, critique, ideas, and a lot of work. But I think we've got there in the end, and I couldn't be prouder of the end result.
When I think about Dalek toys, I think about the Louis Marx ones in the 60s, the Palitoy ones in the 70s, which sort of begged for one. I never got one. I look at the prices on eBay now for one in a box. I'm going, I'll have to sell a kidney. And then you got the Severn's Dalek, which for me, the advertisements of Doctor Who magazine. And of course, we'd never seen anything like it over here. A friend of mine actually imported one and built it in the 80s, did a great job in it. And of course, he got now the character options one. So in terms of that merchandising evolution, they really haven't really gone out of fashion, haven't it? Even in the 90s when the show was off in the, hashtag wilderness years. And then Dalek Toys had the movie one. So it's always been, from a collector's point of view, they've always been out and about.
They're a guaranteed seller.
Yeah.
And I think, like you say, even in the wilderness years, there might not have been that much Doctor Who stuff, but you'd still see some Dalek stuff coming out.
And in terms of accuracy, I think Product Enterprise really hit the nail on the head. They're 12-inch remote control Daleks, and their smaller versions that you push the button on the front and they chat. They were fairly accurate to the design. They're probably the most, until obviously Character came along and then started doing their versions, but they had some issues initially when they were trying to get the dimensions of the Daleks and so forth. But that was probably when I saw they the most accurate looking, and those Severn models were pretty good too.
And I should also give a shout out to the Dapol ones, because they were the ones in the 80s that were actually in toy shops, and they were pretty good for the time as well, the Dapol ones. Manufactured in North Wales, Mark, in Llangollen.
You're
doing much better, mate. You obviously put this book together. What's your favourite piece of Dalek merchandise?
That's a tough one, because having looked at them by decade, it's like, yeah, you develop fondness for certain ones. But I think my favourite Dalek design is, again, going back to the grey and black livery in Resurrection. So I think to finally have the version that Character Options recently released that's properly accurate, that is the toy that I dreamed of having when I was 7 years old. But in terms of others, I was really fond of the Cherry Lee Swap-It Daleks from the 60s. They were the ones that were in different colours and you could swap all the different bits around and customise, if you like. The accuracy wasn't quite there, but there's something just so wonderfully sort of kitchen 60s about them. I just really like them. I think they're really cute. They're really collectible. They've got something really, really nice going on with them. And it's the same with the Talking Dalek from Palitoy in the 70s, which I think was actually the first toy that I got because I found one in a school jumble sale in 1986. Because all I'd longed for as a kid was a toy Dalek, and they didn't exist in the early 80s. The big Severn Model, that was a big model. You couldn't play with it. Your other toys were out of proportion with it, and it was fragile. And I've written about this in the book, but I remember walking into the school hall with a few coins that I'd been given by my parents to spend on anything that I saw. And, everybody had been asked to bring in their unwanted toys and games, and it was all just strewn out all over the place. And I walked in and immediately saw from the other side of the room this Dalek. So I made a beeline for it, thinking I was hallucinating. And no, there it was. It didn't have any guns, but it was a proper Dalek. So and it happened to cost exactly the amount of money that I'd got on me, and realised that when you put batteries in, it talked. So that was just amazing. Very soft spot for the Palitoy Daleks for that particular reason.
Alex, I reckon you're underestimating your travelling to the table. You said you make a beeline for it. I reckon you ran like a madman, throwing old ladies out the way, trying to get to the table to acquire your toy and say, "Get away, kiddies, it's mine."
I remember physically shaking as I was picking it up because I could not believe that there was a Dalek there, and I was terrified somebody was going to come in front of me and take it away, but that never happened.
It's like buying air fryers at Aldi. I mean, the same sort of thing, mate. You got a whole pallet of them. It's me and an old lady arguing against the last one. I can completely understand. And what about you, Mark? Because you've got an amazing collection of stuff. What's your favourite piece of Dalek merchandise?
Being nostalgic now, I guess I love the Dapol range. At the time, I thought they were a bit ugly and a bit inaccurate, but they were the only things I had, because I'm looking at that. It was probably mid to late 80s, when was it 88, 89, I think, when Dapol started churning those things out, or at least here. And I saw it. I jumped off the bus from school and went to a newsagent's and discovered the Doctor Who magazine, and on the back cover was this an advertisement for a range of Dapol products, and an Australian distributor was mentioned. And then obviously that's when I started venturing down to Melbourne and found Minotaur books when they were in, I think, Burke Street. Lo and behold, here's these action figures in the 3.75 range of these little pepper pots. So I started buying a few of those. But when you compare them to that, I think that's probably my most nostalgic piece, is the Dapol stuff, because I've had that connection of going to the exhibition and being in the township, and just and then recently revisiting it. Obviously nothing left there now, but I did my little revisit tour, and when I was met up with Alec, from a nostalgia point of view, that's probably my little Dapol cabinets are probably my key thing. And one other Dalek that probably stood out was the Product Enterprise movie Dalek. I had a black and gold one that I was, like Alex, he worked into a shop. I think it might have been an ABC shop or somewhere like that. It was outside of the normal, because I grew up in country Victoria, so didn't have access to a plethora of Doctor Who products. So whenever I did see something, I'd see the logo and make a beeline like Alex, pushing old ladies out of the way, running to the back corner to see what was there. And I found this 12-inch remote control thing, which I've still got. Been a great little toy. So that's probably my couple of favourite pieces.
The Dapol Daleks, they were a real sort of game changer in a way, because they were the first full range of Dalek toys that had ever been produced. Because prior to that, we'd had the Citadel miniatures, the little metal figures in the mid-80s. But in terms of actual toys, Dennis Fisher and Palitoy just produced the one kind, and there was only a couple of variants of the Marx ones. So I certainly remember in 1988 being an excited 10-year-old when the Remembrance of the Daleks was on and getting my first Dalek toy in matching colour scheme, to what we'd just seen on television. It was really amazing, and a lot of fun memories collecting those, because even if they weren't that accurate, it was proper Dalek toys at long last that I'd been waiting for years.
We will sort of say, look, the dimensions weren't right on some of them, and Davros had 2 arms and some other sort of crazy stuff, but really in terms of just tapping into that sort of last gasp of a little bit of Dalekmania after Remembrance, because it was a big story, just to have something from that tangible to hold was pretty good, actually. Their contribution's very, very underrated.
And the fact that you could go to, when the factory was running, wished I could have done it, but you were able to go and make your own Daleks, and they'd have commemorative days where the actors would come down. Tom Baker would go 2 birds with one stone, go and see your favourite Who actor and go and build a Dalek while you're at it. So, yeah, and then as far as accuracy, I think my all-time favourite now is the character range, obviously, because I've got so many of them. But yeah, from a Nostalgia Fest point of view, that sits well in my heart.
And what about Dalek merchandise that you wish you had? If you turn around to your shelves, what would you like to see on there, if money was no object?
Well, for me, if I was to turn around right now, obviously my Who Cave, I have a bit of extra space. I'd love to have a life-size Dalek sitting in here. Yeah, that's probably, he wouldn't quite fit on a shelf, but certainly I'd love a classic Dalek to have that facing me, anytime I walk in here. So that's probably on my wish list.
What about you, Alex?
I always had a soft spot for the original 1960s Rollikins, the little ones with the ball bearing in the bottom, which go for quite a lot of money on eBay now. So I always wanted one of those, but never got one. I've got a couple of the Swap-Its. I would like more because they were just nice. And same with the 60s Marks. I had one as a kid because there was another lad at school who'd got one and we did a trade. This obviously was a Dalek that belonged to his parents. And I had no idea that back then that was probably a 20-year-old toy. To me, it was another Dalek toy, so I was thrilled to bits with it, to the point of deciding to hacksaw the dome off and fill it with wires and plasticine and stuff.
We're all cringing. You can't see the video, but we're all sort of holding our faces in horror. But anyway, yes, keep going, Alex.
And another favourite of mine was the Citadel Miniatures mini set of 20 Daleks and Cybermen, which came out in 1987, I think. Back in the day, I had 2 boxes, and it had the most beautiful box art by Lee Gibbons. So I would like another set of those, but again, they're pretty hard to come by, certainly in a complete state, and pretty costly when it comes to finding them on eBay. I wish I just preserved one of my sets and never opened it. But
we've also focused a lot on the classic era of the Daleks. What about the new series in terms of Dalek evolution and design? How do you think they've been treated?
When it was rumoured that the Daleks were coming back, there was all sorts of speculation and I guess fear. What were they going to do to them? Were they going to ruin them? And I remember when the first photographs got leaked to the tabloids of the new design on set, it looked magnificent, and you think, oh, thank goodness they've done it justice. They've modernised it, but kept all the design, the shape, the proportions in place. The complete opposite to what happened when they decided to make the Paradigm Daleks, which most people hated, because you only need to change a few small things on the Dalek design and you've ruined it.
And one TV appearance later, last time I saw them, they were in the Cardiff exhibition, in that they had like a little show at the beginning, and they were wheeled out. Obviously, they found the use there, shove them in an exhibition so they don't do any damage on screen. And in Asylum of Daleks, you had nearly every Dalek variant there, including the good old special weapons. That's a great design as well, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think what they did with the Imperial design was excellent, because they changed it to be different, but without being significantly different. Just things like the angles were slightly different. They were slightly taller. They'd got the hexagonal disc and the hexagonal motif in the neck mesh. They were just a fantastic design, and I think a lot of that ultimately went into the more modern day design. Asylum was a good story, but it could have been better. I think the idea of it was really good, and it was a bit underused. I always thought, imagine how cool that would have been as a two-parter where they really have to explore this big asylum full of all different kinds of Daleks in there. It felt like the carrot had been dangled a little bit with that one. The bronze Daleks, you've only had the bronze or the black or the one red Emperor there, whereas there hasn't been the variation in colour schemes like we had in the classic series, and I think the bronze ones have just become very boring now.
Alex, can you give us a bit of a rundown in terms of people that want to buy this book, what they're going to expect?
Well, it is a history of toy and model Daleks, but it is told also from a personal point of view as a fan and as a collector growing up with these things. It's not a dry history. There's quite a lot of anecdotes in there as well, little personal stories. And every model that I've looked at I've critiqued it, look at what worked about it, look at what didn't work, and also try and find out why. For example, like in the 60s, why were the toys so inaccurate? Once Telos sent me over a copy of the 1960s BBC style guide for Doctor Who. All that people were given to go on was a side drawing in line art of a Dalek with no scale, no proportions. So I think toy manufacturers, they had to make do with what they'd seen on TV and what this one-dimensional drawing. There's a lot of critique in the book, a lot of sort of complaining about the number of side panels or shape of hexagons and Dalek balls and this, that and the other. I've also looked at when commercially available toys and models have been used in the series in visual effects shots, and I had help from Mike Tucker and Matt Irvin, two of the obviously legendary VFX guys. So that's been quite interesting, looking at all the different shots right down to the black and white stories and the Planet of the Daleks with the ice volcano, and then all the stuff in the later years series, the character options models we used and blown to bits and this, that and the other. So I think that makes a nice section because it's not just looking at toys and critiquing them, it's then looking at when they appeared in the show, like when the Severn's model was used in Revelation of the Daleks, for example. I think there's an interesting section on that because it does add another dimension. And of course, Davros gets his own mini chapter along the way, because we couldn't have a book on the Daleks and not feature Davros.
Well, especially now it's the 50th anniversary.
I was actually at a Who convention listening to David Goodison, who obviously played Davros in Destiny. So everybody realised while he was on stage that it was the Davros anniversary.
But he jumped out of his chair with his newfound legs. Fantastic. Great to see.
It probably just made him feel old. But I think we've covered a lot of good ground in the books because it's not just the history. There's bits of background information on each of the companies that produce them. There's my own critiques. There's various other written pieces by Richard Hayes, taking a bit of a different angle, a different look at different aspects. Like we've got a section on why red Daleks were so popular, things like that. I deliberately also avoided going into the wider merchandise. Yeah. So I think there is a bit of the extra stuff that you got in the 60s, like you Dalek money boxes and bendy toys and nursery toys and that sort of thing, or the War of the Daleks board game in the 70s. But I really wanted to stick to the remit of toys and models. So that's really the focus of what we've done.
And Mark, how did you go about setting up your shot? Was Alex saying, I need this model, I need this photo of this type of Dalek? You go off and either have it in your collection or...
When Alex would say, look, I'm writing, a bit about character, or I'm writing a bit about the Dapol, obviously, I've got a fair bit of that sort of Dapol character range in en masse. But it was about, and as Alex said, as I was taking more photos from the original project to the Talos project, my photography skills probably increased a little bit, knowing more so what theme I'm trying to, be on the same level of Alex as what he was looking for, what he was trying to achieve, because to go hand in hand to have those shots that would mirror what he's discussing. So I would go back to the, good old days of the BBC and visual effects, and I'd make little sets, or I'd have smoke machines, or and there were some shots I'd previously already created that we thought were still good enough to go into the new book. But essentially, like even the Destiny range of figures that character brought out, I went to the extent of building a little mini Scaro set from sand and polystyrene and basically and a lot of perspective shots and stuff to make it look the part. So those sort of images, instead of just being photos on a shelf of a Dalek sitting there to say this is a representation, I thought, well, people are going to be flipping through this as like a coffee table book. As already pointed out, there's been no other type of book like this this before, that I think from a fan's point of view, they're like me, it's a visual aid thing as well. You can sit there, you can flick through it and read through those articles and then also have those comparison photos. Yeah, so a lot of them are recreated, like, just either stuff in the cabinet, the Citadel miniatures stuff. I have actually got an almost mint box from those with some of the figures that I got in the 80s when I did a swap for my Robotech figures, and I got a heap of Daleks and Cybermen out of that deal. But then recently, a mutual friend of ours, Aaron Challenger, had in his store, happened to have a box that was almost near mint, and a few unpressed figures. So I had to obviously take that into my collection. So
I was going to say, you raced down to Melbourne breaking all speed records.
Yeah. And look, and as I said, and then when it came to looking at some of the other types of Daleks and prototypes, obviously our mutual friend Aaron Challenger, who has Aaron's Collectibles in Melbourne, is a massive Who fan, is probably an understatement, and collector. And obviously he was very generous in being able to let me take some of those away from the store to do some close-up photography on. So just to give an idea what some of these prototypes and stuff looked like before they hit mainstream. So yeah, mixture of themed photography using lighting, smoke machines, all that business, and then obviously some straight-laced photography as well, so for cut and paste for the book. But yeah, generally a fun project to work on.
So you weren't doing like sort of dioramas, you're doing like Dalek-ramas.
Yeah, Dalek-ramas. So yeah. I would try and replicate, and even going back to Classic Who mainly and looking at some key photographs that have been taken, like some of the things, like as an example, like there's, the Colin Baker and the Revelation Daleks in the black background and smoke, and trying to replicate the older style Daleks, again, in atmospheric. So yeah, look, it was just a mishmash of trying to either replicate something that's been out there in figure form or just to give that impression. But yeah, all in all, great fun little project to work on, and happy to keep working with Alex as long as he wants to have me as the unpaid scientific advisor.
Actually, Alex, I do want to ask you a very nice question. You mentioned Planet of Daleks before with the ice caves. So are the Louis Marx toys still on sale in 73, or do they have like a warehouse of unused ones sitting at the back somewhere at the BBC?
The toys that were used in that end sequence, it was actually, they did a plaster cast from one model. So they basically replicated it in plaster, and they swapped the eyes for golf tees because they look more like the Dalek eye stalks than the ones the toys came with.
Good old BBC improvisation.
It is, yeah. No toy Daleks were harmed in the making of that scene. You'd be glad to know it was actually just replicas taken from the cast of one of the Marx toys.
You ripped their heads off and shoved all wires in there anyway. Decapitation of the Daleks. Yeah. Hey, maybe Character Options are missing a trick. They should be doing the plaster cast set from Planet of Daleks.
Interesting as well. I think, was it the Hertz Dalek, Alex, that when I went to the Mike Tucker's exhibition that he set up at the Gunnersbury Park, where they had snippets of Doctor Who plethora, and obviously had the original prop Dalek from Remembrance in there restored.
Wow.
But also he had set up, like you mentioned previously, the 60s recast Hertz that he used for that Blu-ray special, where they made the conveyor belt with all the multiple Daleks. And so I took some photography of that, and also the character option stuff where character had organised empty shells, I think, of the larger Daleks for them to utilise for the newer series episodes when they were doing those shots on Skaro. And for me, these couple of projects have sort of stemmed a bit of my own creativity. So I currently have negotiated with Al Juar from Character Options and Ed Barnett Ward, and I'm doing a series of videos by YouTube just revisiting, I guess, some inspiration. I've always wanted to delve into that, and I'm not, a proficient writer like Alex is, but happy to network people and get people together to chat about stuff. So currently in the works, we've released episode 1, just to chat about 20 years of Character Options and some of the initial challenges and that faced moving forward to the current series. And that's been a fun little project that's now ongoing. And then obviously Alex and I have discussed, I'm under using my Who Cave Conversations banner, looking at some other little further projects down the track that we might do together, and get some Who people to talk to, get some interesting insights into stuff. And I've spoken to Neil Cole already about his wonderful little museum. So potentially Alex and I are going to have a chat with Neil about some of that stuff that he does to bring a bit of joy to Classic Who fans and beyond.
Because really getting to those places is out of reach for a lot of people. Just having that video clips and segments about, these exhibitions that just don't get enough profile, definitely worth looking into it and getting out there.
I just found that there's a bit of a gap, especially for us Australians. Like, I was very fortunate that I've just been in a couple of right places at the right time. Going to see David Howe's place, which was fantastic, and a good old chat. And I'm now still, keep talking to David and Sam. Obviously, we made that road trip to see Neil. And so I thought, well, why not? And that was a last minute decision. I thought, I'm here all the way here. I want to share this with people and show them the stuff that they're missing out on, because it's, even for people in the UK, it's about a 5.5 hour drive from London, driving direct with no stops up to, but it was worth the trip. They're the few things that I've liked to share in those exhibitions, and and get some good feedback. So that's the little project stuff I'll have on the go.
And we're used to driving those long distances, Mark. I mean, a lot of people in the UK, they have to stop at a little chef every 10 minutes and have a cup of tea. Pull over.
Yes. Whereas I was fairly resilient and drove directly. Well, my first stop was with Alex, but unfortunately, with the temptation of being all the way in the UK, I had to do the B&M stop. And obviously, I mapped out a couple of, this will be easy. I'll just detour into this town and drive to the nearest B&M. And of course, I didn't realise it takes me, miles and miles outside of the motorway.
Yeah.
And really upset my trip and added an extra hour and a half or two onto it. But you live and learn.
So, Alex and Mark, if anybody wants to buy this book, where do they get it from?
Well, the book is out now, and it can be ordered directly from the Tellus website. In the UK, it's been listed on Waterstones, WH Smith's, and of course Amazon. Buying it direct from Tellus, of course, publisher and author make more from it.
And I think there's also links via Tellus Distributions also in the US and New Zealand, I think.
Yep, I think there's information about that on the Tellus website.
You finished this great tome. What's next on the horizon?
Well, I'm currently working on a new version of the Blackpool Remembered book. This will be available in print. And this is, if we look back at the first Blackpool Remembered that myself and John Collier produced in 2020 now, that was a 400-page ebook. So with 2025 being the 40th anniversary since the Blackpool exhibition closed, I thought it would be a nice idea to sort of really condense that into a best of, if you like. So I've been sort of mostly doing that myself, updating some of the content with stuff that we've found out since then, or updated pictures and this, that and the other, but a much more digestible size and a format that can be printed. I'm hoping to have it finished by Easter, because that would have coincided with when the exhibition season opened. So as a commemorative book, I'm hoping to that's going to be self-published, so that will be coming out then. And we have been working on a book about the Llangollen exhibition and the Dapol factory. As Mark said, that goes way back a few years now, and that's mainly, I think, in John's hands. So we'll be picking that up and finishing that at some point as well.
Because the Blackpool Remembered book was fantastic, and especially I was very lucky to go there when I used to live in the UK, and I just remembered reading it all day. It was just a great trip down memory lane in terms of the evolution of the exhibition, how things were staged. I just remember the Dalek, you go down the stairs and that Dalek voice just scared the rubbish out of me. And then you also did Longleat Remembered as well. Great as well. I was lucky to go there, and I'm looking forward to the Llangollen book. I had pictures of me sitting in Bessie, apparently the non-canon one.
That's called Magnety. That was his own that he had made sitting out the front for events and weddings and things.
Last time I had Alex and John on, they broke my heart when I said to them I sat down in the real Bessie. They said, no, you didn't. You sat down in a non-canon one, like the Temu version of it. And I was really upset for days, so I haven't forgiven them that much. Yeah. Really looking forward to seeing that book, and we'll get you guys on when that book is about to come out as well, and make sure you guys can pronounce Llangollen correctly.
I'll practice in the meantime.
You better get that phlegm going, mate. Get that phlegm going. So, gentlemen, look, thank you very much for appearing on 40 to Doomsday. Again, go and check the book out. I'll put the links in the show notes, but I encourage everybody to order directly from Tellus, this fantastic book. Alex and Mark, thank you very much for both appearing, and congratulations on the book. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy, and we'll talk to you you blokes soon in terms of any upcoming projects, especially around the Llangollen Remembered. Ensure that you boys get the name and the pronunciation correct before it goes to publication.
Of course it will.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
See you
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All the best.
You've just listened to another episode of 42 to Doomsday, the podcast that loves talking about Doctor Who. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please drop us a line at 42todoomsday@gmail.com. We can be reached at facebook.com/42todoomsday. If brevity is your game, we can be found on Twitter at 42todoomsday. Please check out our blog, 42todoomsday.wordpress.com, where Mark and I occasionally have something interesting to say. Aside from iTunes, you can listen to us via Stitcher and Player FM. If you enjoyed listening to us, leave a review on iTunes. As always, thank you for listening. Have a great week. We'll speak with you again soon.